They say that you never forget your first case. And for me, that very much was true. I was a 25-year-old, newly hired CPS investigator with sort of not a clue in the world about child abuse and neglect. I found myself hired somehow as a social worker, and how it works is you get a little bit of training, and then they kind of throw you to the wolves. It's sink or swim. They're so desperate for workers that the second you get trained, you're off and running. And so I remember getting my first case. It comes to you on a sheet of paper, and it explains to you what the allegations are. And so in this case, it was a 20-year-old female. She had 2 kids, 4 and 2. You can do the math there. She was pregnant at 16. And the allegations were that she was using drugs, and that her children weren't being cared for, and that the conditions of the home were deplorable. And so I get this case, and you read through it, and so they partner you up with somebody who's kind of a seasoned veteran, to show you the ropes. And so I go out with this gal who had been there a long time, and I'd describe her, like the word I would use would be salty. She was just kind of she'd been around. I know, salty, who uses that word, right? She is just like a grizzled old veteran, man. She'd been there and done that, and I had no clue. And so we show up at this trailer park, and we knock on the door, and this woman answers. And in my humble opinion, she was a beautiful girl. This was before I was married and other girls were attractive. I'm so glad that now I'm married that no other women are attractive. But this woman, yeah, you guys know how this is. This woman opened the door, and she said, "What's going on?" We explained to her why we were there, that we needed to see the home and see the kids. And when she opened the door, nothing in my life could have prepared me for what I saw. The house was so filthy, and there was dirty diapers and dog feces and moldy food everywhere that you could hardly take a step inside there. I saw 2 little kids in their diapers running around, screaming and crying. Two men were there that refused to identify themselves, and I was shell-shocked. I mean, I grew up in middle-class, white America, loving Christian home. I had been to Mexico on mission trips. I've done some stuff, but I had never experienced child abuse and neglect. And so I was sort of, like a deer in headlights, and this worker, thankfully she was there with me. Basically, this wasn't very good social work, but basically what she said was, "Hey, listen, I know you're using drugs. You're going to go down and do a urine test for me. You're going to get this place cleaned up in 3 days, or we're going to have problems. All right, see you later." That was like the extent of her conversation. And I'm like, "See you later." Like, what just happened? How did I end up here? About a month later, I got another case, and I was working with this single mom. She had 3 kids, 2 twin 3-year-old girls and a 1-year-old boy. And I was working with her. We were suspicious she was using drugs. One day I did an unannounced visit to her house to check on the kids, and I could hear the kids screaming and crying, and the door was sort of half ajar. And so you can't really walk into somebody's house, it's like breaking and entering. But the door was kind of open, and so I peeked my head in, and I saw this woman laying on the floor, semi-unconscious, with a bottle of pills all over and 3 naked children running around. In those moments, it was a very quick learning curve for me on what the world is like for children who are abused and neglected. Life as a social worker is difficult. I didn't set out to be a social worker. I actually went to school to become an elementary school teacher. And when I was finishing my student teaching, I was student teaching in a 5th grade classroom. And I loved the kids, and I loved coaching. I coached the flag football team to the first undefeated school, in history, 5th graders. They have a bronze statue of me outside of the school. It was amazing. I drew up some incredible plays. I've never played football in my life, but I've watched a lot, and I'm like, if we just do this and this, it's going to work, and it did. And I was literally like jumping up on the sidelines. It was embarrassing, but awesome. I loved teaching. I loved the 5th graders, but my heart was really for the kids in my class that came from sort of troubled backgrounds. It's just something inside of me. I just thought, man, I like these other kids. They're nice and good, but man, these kids, they need some extra love. And so when I graduated, I decided, well, I will go and to kind of do something more social worky. And so I was young and single, and I could afford to live on minimum wage, and so I opened up the newspaper and just looked for jobs. I got hired at 2 places. The first is a place called Crosswalk, which is a homeless shelter for teenagers downtown, just right down the hill here. And so I got hired as a night staff, so basically helping put these kids to bed, getting them a snack, getting them ready, and getting them up in the morning for school. Again, I had no clue what I was getting myself into. The first time a 13-year-old showed up at the door at 1 a.m. that was about this tall and said he needed a place to sleep at night was pretty mind-blowing for me. The second job that I got was with an agency called Lutheran Community Services. And the fancy title that they gave me was called a therapeutic aide. It was really just a glorified way of saying that I got paid to hang out with foster kids. These kids were high-needs foster kids. They were in behavioral homes. And so my job was to take them into the community. They had these treatment plans. They had these therapists who were working with them. And so they'd be like, "Hey, John, we need you to take this 12-year-old to the mall and his job today is to interact with 2 people, and the goal today is for him not to stab any one of those. So that's what we're going to work on today. Oh, yeah, that's great, awesome. And so we played a lot of video games. We went to the Y and played basketball a lot, and that was my second job. And that was really my first introduction into the world of foster care. I'll skip a whole bunch in there, but at some point in my life, I ended up going a different route, and I was doing flooring. So I was laying tile and carpet, and I was the only guy on my crew that was not a felon and a drug addict. And so I was, again, this nice Christian boy working on this crew with these pretty rough dudes, but I loved them, and it was fun. We worked hard. One of them had his 5th child, and I knew that they were struggling, the family was struggling financially, and so at my church, I organized a diaper drive. I just thought, I just want to bless them. I know they don't have a lot, and so I just want people to bring in diapers, and we're gonna bless this guy. So I said that in front of the church, and afterwards, somebody approached me and said, hey, tell me again what you do for a living, and what is it? And he said, I'm a supervisor at Child Protective Services, and I think you'd really make a good social worker. I think you'd make a really good social worker. Have you ever done social work before? And I'm like, well, sort of, kind of. And so he helped me totally fudge my application, and I got an interview. And I know, right? Because that's what the state does. I totally am going to get fired after this. It was 10 years ago, so I think I'm good. It was like, do you have any experience working with battered women? And I'm like, not really. He's like, do you know what a battered woman is? I'm like, yeah. He's like, all right, you're good. That was the application process. So somehow I found myself, again, it's funny when you look back on your life, 10 years, how naive you were. I didn't know what I was doing, but I got hired at CPS as a social worker. And so for the first 2.5 years, I did investigations. So my job, as I mentioned already, was to go out to interview children, to find out what's going on in their home, to remove them from their homes if that's what needed to happen. For 5 years after that, I did what we call the middleman job, which is once children are removed from their homes, a lot of people don't realize that they enter into a court process. They're in the court system. There's judges and attorneys and all kinds of people involved in the system. The goal is to get kids back with their parents or to get them with a grandma or grandpa or somebody else. And so you carry those cases for 6 months, 2-3 years, and you walk them through until those kids have a permanent plan. So I did that for about 5 years. And in the last 2 years, I made it to what we call the promised land, which is foster care licensing. It's the promised land because my job is much less stressful than the other jobs that I had. And so what I do now is I help people like the Gores who come and say, I'm interested in foster care. I want to become a foster parent. I help them through that process to get licensed. The life of a social worker is a very difficult one. It's a very hard job. For the first several years, people would often say to me, man, you have a really hard job. And my response was always the same. It was, well, yeah, it's hard, but every job is hard, right? If you work at McDonald's, if you work at Walmart, if you're a banker, if you're a pastor, whatever you do, life is hard. Work is hard. But as the years went on, I found myself realizing, no, actually my job is pretty hard. My job is actually harder than a lot of my friends. And the reason I found this out was because my coworkers would leave. They would get another job, they'd go work somewhere else, they'd become a counselor or do something, and I'd see them 6 months later at the mall, and they would have lost 50 pounds, and they'd be smiling, and they'd be like, John, you've got to get out, man. There's life outside of the state. I'm like, dang, what happened to you? And they're just like, I got out. We use prison terms in social work. How long you been in? I've been in 2 years. Oh, man, that dude over there, he's a lifer. What did he do to get life? I don't know, man, but don't talk to him. He is messed up. Social work is a very difficult job. Why is it such a difficult job? Well, first and foremost, the subject matter that you're dealing with is difficult, right? I mean, you never walk in on a Monday morning and get a case in front of you that says, hey, we've got a family up on the South Hill. They've got 3 Harvard-educated children, and they're raising a 10-year-old who's on the U.S. Olympic track team, junior trials, and we just want you to check in with them. You don't get those kind of cases in CPS. Every single day, you get the worst of society on your desk. And so the subject matter you're dealing with on an everyday basis just wears you out. The second thing is that social workers have very high caseloads. There's all kinds of legislative mandate that I won't bore you with that says, hey, social workers really shouldn't have more than 18 cases at a time. There's all kinds of studies that say social workers, to do best practice social work, should only have 12 cases. Meanwhile, in our office, I don't know what it is, now, but when I was a worker, it was not uncommon for people to have 30, 35, almost 40 cases at a time. You say, well, what does that mean? This is how I explain it to people. Imagine for a moment that you are the parent of 30 children placed all over Spokane County, all over Washington State, sometimes all over the United States. And your job is to be in charge of all of their medical, their physical health, their mental health records, their substance abuse treatments, their counseling, their behavior management, their school records. And you have to see each and every one of them every single month in their home. And all of a sudden, you start looking and going, wait a second, there's only like 20 work days in the month, and you have to see 35 kids, and you have to write court reports. On top of that, it's a very, there's an emergent nature of the job. And so you plan your day, and you say, today I'm going to get my paperwork done. I'm going to get it done today. People put up these yellow caution tape signs like around a criminal investigation. I'm not kidding, across their cube. And we call it protected time. Like, do not talk to me. Do not get near me. I've got to get my paperwork done. And while you're getting your paperwork done, you get a phone call that 8-year-old little Johnny just punched his teacher in the face. And the foster parent can't come pick him up because they've already used all their sick leave. And so guess who has to go pick up the kid at school? The social worker. So not only do you have high caseloads, not only is it emergent, not only are you dealing with difficult subject matter, but you have a big responsibility. As a social worker, oftentimes what you believe about a child and what should happen to them is what goes. I mean, there's a court system, there's attorneys, there's judges, but if you have a good reputation as a social worker and people trust you and respect you, a lot of times you're making decisions that will affect the child's life for the rest of their life. So you can see why social workers get burned out. They say the average life of a CPS social worker is, well, not life, but their life at work, their work history is 12 to 18 months. I've been around almost 10 years. In that time, I've seen people come in with PhDs. I've seen people come in that were heads of major social service agencies. I've seen teachers come in. I've seen lawyers come in and work. And within 3 months, they're like, this is crazy. I'm out of here. It happens all the time. So the life of a social worker is very difficult. On top of all those things that I just mentioned, one of the biggest problems for social workers, honestly, is we have a severe shortage of foster homes. A severe shortage. I would call it a foster care crisis. So while you're dealing with all this other stuff, we're also trying to find placements for kids. And what happens is we don't have enough foster homes for the number of kids that are coming into care. And so as a licensor, on an almost daily basis, we have a home finders unit that finds the places for the kids. They're calling us licensors, and they're requesting what are called overcapacities, which means they say, hey, this family right here, they're licensed for 2 kids, ages 0 to 8. They've already got 2 kids. Can we place a sibling set of 3 with them? And we'll do a triple overcapacity with them. Hey, this family right here, they're licensed for kids 0 to 1. They really want an infant baby. Do you think that they'd be interested in taking the 17-year-old gangbanger into their home? Well, I can ask them. I'm not sure. But a lot of time and effort is spent trying to find kids' homes. And what happens is, honestly, is we just have foster parents right now that are burned out. They've been grinding, they've been doing it so long, they've been doing it so hard, they love these kids, but they're just burned out because the second a child leaves their home to go home or to go to an adoptive home, we've got them on the phone, another kid in the home, and then another one. People used to ask me, what do you do when you can't find a placement for a kid? I mean, what do you do if there's not enough homes, right? And my answer used to always be, we find something. We always find something. If it means cramming that 7th kid in that home, we're going to do it. But that answer changed for me about 3 months ago. Because on a Friday night, we picked up 3 kids, 3 siblings, 3, 5, and 7. We could not find a foster home in all of Spokane County that could take these kids, and so they slept on my office floor. Can you imagine being a 7-year-old and being removed from your parents' home and having to sleep on my office floor? About 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago, there was a little 2.5-year-old girl, a little blonde girl, beautiful blue eyes. I had a chance to meet her through some circumstances. Verbal, she didn't have any really physical issues, developmental issues, which most of our kids have. She was just a beautiful little girl. We could not find a home in Spokane County to take in a 2-year-old girl. There weren't enough homes to take in a 2-year-old girl. I met her and I saw her. So she ended up going to a place called Sally's House, which is run by the Salvation Army. It's a wonderful organization, but really it's an orphanage. They can have 16 kids there at a time. So this little 2-year-old girl who's removed from her home has no place to go in Spokane, so we put her in an orphanage. I don't do social media. I'm not on Twitter. I'm not on Facebook. I've never made a video. That night on my way home, I wanted to make the most epic rant video there ever was, right? I wanted to go viral. And I wanted to scream at the church in Spokane. And I wanted to say, how is it that we have 50,000 or more Christians in Spokane and we don't have a place for a 2-year-old little girl to lay her head at night? And so the question for us is, what is our responsibility? What does this mean for us? What is our responsibility? Well, imagine with me for a moment. Imagine that Jesus Christ himself is going to be coming to Spokane and he's going to give a sermon. He's going to come to the arena, and he's going to pack it like 15 times over, right? Because if Jesus is coming to town, I mean, we put out tents for Gonzaga basketball, and we fill up, stadiums for Taylor Swift. If Jesus Christ is coming to Spokane, how many of you going? How many of you getting tickets? Yeah, about half of you. The other ones, you're sinners. But everybody, right? Everybody is going to go see Jesus. And so you buy your tickets to go see Jesus, and we're going to pretend that there's a bigger arena than the Spokane arena. And we've got all 50,000 Christians in the arena. And Jesus Christ himself shows up. And he says to you, to the church in Spokane, there's some really good things about you. You do a really good job of caring for homeless adults in Spokane. The Union Gospel Mission, Blessings Under the Bridge, other organizations, you guys are doing a really good job of caring for homeless adults in Spokane. To the church in Spokane, you guys do an excellent job with stewardship. You're in the Northwest, you see my creation, you try to take care of it, you reduce and reuse and recycle, and I just really appreciate that. To the church in Spokane, you do an excellent job with your worship ministries. You're passionate, it's moving. But here I hold one thing against you. You do not love the orphans in the way that I have commanded. And imagine if he said, hey, listen, here's the deal. Spokane needs 300 foster homes. With 300 new foster homes in Spokane, the crisis could be solved. And so as your Lord and Savior, I am asking you, is there anyone here that would be willing to step up to the plate and become a foster parent? I am asking you, is there 300 families in all of Spokane that would step up to relieve the burden of the foster parents who are tired and weary, to relieve the burden of the social workers so they don't have to spend so much time on placements, they can work on the needs of the kids? Is there 300 families here that can do that? And then he says, if you're interested, I got a booth afterwards. You can come up, you can get an autograph, and you can sign up to become a foster parent. Do you think that 300 families in Spokane would show up at Jesus' booth? I think it'd probably be more like 3,000, right? Imagine if he came to Summit Church and said, Summit, the burden for your congregation is 20 families. I need 20 new foster families at Summit to step up to the plate. Do you think we could get 20 families if Jesus Christ was standing here and asking you to do that? I think we could. But here's the thing. Jesus actually doesn't need to come to an arena to tell us to love orphans. Why? Because he did it already. Over and over and over again. For those of you who have read through the Bible before or read a lot of it, you'll notice that as you read through the Bible, there's major themes that crop up. Over and over again. It's not by coincidence, it's by design that across the 66 books and the different authors, there's these threads, these themes that come up. So for example, one theme that you find in the scriptures is that God is the creator of all. So we see that in Genesis 1, God creates, and you see it through the rest of Scripture. God is the one who creates. God is the one who brings life. That's a theme. Another theme that you'll see is that God is a relational God. So you see from Genesis, at the very beginning of Genesis, God creates humans to interact with him, to interact with each other, and you see that theme through the rest of Scripture. God is relational to us, and we're relational to people. Another theme that you'll see is that God desires and called Israel to be a blessing to the nations. He said, I've chosen you, and your job is to bless everyone else. Jesus comes along and says to the Christians, to his followers, your job is to be a blessing, to be salt and light in the world. These are themes. These are things that when we read the Bible, we have to pay attention to because they come up over and over again. And one of the biggest themes that we see over and over again is that God is concerned with three types of people. Specifically, he has a heart for these types of people. Most of you know them already. They are the widow, the orphan, or the fatherless, and the foreigner. So God says over and over again, I have a special heart for women whose husband has died. And that back in the day, women whose husbands died, they couldn't really care for themselves. It was a different type of culture. And so God says, your job, church, your job at the time, Israel is to take care of the people, to take care of the widows. And then he talks about the fatherless. Children in your community that don't have parents who can care for them, your job is to take care of them. And then he says the foreigners, people that came into Israel, came into their group from other languages, other people groups. He says you take special care of them because they have some extra hardships. And so I want to read just a couple passages. You'll see it up there on the screen already. Deuteronomy 10, verses 12 through 19 says this. This is right after God has given the 10 Commandments for the second time because he got really mad and broke them earlier, or Moses did. And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments and statutes of the Lord, which I am commanding you today for your good. Behold, to the Lord your God belong heaven and the heaven of heavens, the earth with all that is in it. Yet the Lord set his heart in love on your fathers and chose their offspring after them, you above all peoples, as you are this day. Circumcise, therefore, the foreskin of your heart. No longer be stubborn, for the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great, the mighty, the awesome God, who is not partial and does not take bribes. He executes justice for the fatherless and the widow, and he loves the sojourner or the foreigner, giving him food and clothing. Love the foreigner, therefore, for you were foreigners in the land of Egypt. And so he says here that I am a God who executes justice for the fatherless, for the foreigners, and for the widows. Just a couple chapters over in Deuteronomy, chapter 24, verse 17. This is kind of a cool story. It says this: you shall not pervert the justice due to the sojourner or to the fatherless, or take a widow's garment in pledge, but you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore I command you to do this. When you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It's for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat your olive trees, you shall not go over them again. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not strip it afterward. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore, I command you to do this. Do you catch what happened there? He basically is saying, hey, listen, when you're doing your crops and you're on your apple tree and the fruit falls to the ground, you leave those ones for the people who can't feed themselves. God says, you take care of these people. I'm going to read just a couple more because I want you to understand that this is all based on Scripture. A couple chapters over, Deuteronomy 27:19, God is in a series of blessings and curses in his covenant with his people. He's saying, if you do this, I will bless you. If you do this, I will curse you. I know that sounds weird for God to curse people, but read the Old Testament. Deuteronomy 27:19 says, cursed be anyone who perverts the justice due to the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. And all the people shall say, amen. Just two more. Psalm chapter 68, verse 4. Sing to God, sing praises to his name. Lift up a song for him who rides through the deserts. His name is Yahweh. Exult before him. Father of the fatherless and protector of widows is God in his holy habitation. What are the characteristics of God? He is a father to the fatherless and a protector of the widows. Matthew 25, I'm not going to read it here. It's a very famous story where Jesus says, hey, you want to go to heaven? You want to be with me? You want to have eternal life? Whatever you do to the least of these people, you've done to me. Remember when you visited me in jail? Remember when I was sick and you took care of me? Remember I didn't have clothes and you gave me clothes? Remember when I didn't have food and you gave me food? And the people say, Jesus, we don't remember doing that to you. Whatever you've done for anybody else, you've done it to me. And finally, James, verse 127, probably the preeminent verse in the New Testament on orphan care. It says, religion that is true and undefiled before God, the Father, is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction and to keep oneself unstained from the world. What's true religion? What does God really desire? To take care of the orphans and the widows and to keep yourself abstained from the sin and the dangers of the world. It's interesting that in the Old Testament, oftentimes when Israel is in trouble, when they've strayed and God has it out for them, the indictment against them is very frequently, you are not doing these three things anymore. When Israel fails to take care of widows, orphans, and foreigners, it's a sign that something is wrong in the community. It's a litmus test. How's your church doing? How's your community doing? If you're caring for the widows and the orphans and the refugees, you're doing all right. But when you start to stray from that, we have to take a look at ourselves. So what does this mean for us? What does this mean for the church? Again, I urge you to think about if Jesus Christ came to us today and he said to us, he said to Summit Church, he said to me, John, why is it that there's 50,000 Christians in Spokane and we don't have a placement for a 2-year-old girl? Tell me again, why, John? I don't think I'd have a good answer. And I don't think we as a church community would have a good answer either. Now, I want to clarify something real quick. I don't want you to get the wrong idea because this has the temptation to start going into guilt and conviction, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I do not believe that every single person is called or should be a foster parent. I think there's a lot of people that don't have the ability to do it for a variety of reasons. Maybe it's physical limitations. Maybe your health just wouldn't allow you to care for kids. Maybe your marriage is struggling, your marriage isn't solid, and so your family structure is not in a place right now where you can do that. Maybe you've got some financial struggles that you need to get in order. For many people, honestly, they just haven't dealt with their childhood trauma. Many people grow up in trauma. They've had horrible childhood experiences. They've never gone to counseling. They've never dealt with it. They're probably not good candidates right now to care for kids that are coming from trauma. That's going to create all kinds of chaos for both them and the child. So there are definitely reasons why people shouldn't and couldn't be foster parents. But for those of you that don't have any of those excuses, my question for you is, why not you? What is your excuse for why you cannot take a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old into your home? Do you have space? Do you have availability? Why not you? Over the years, I've heard a common expression from people. When I tell them what I do, when I tell them about the need for foster care, there's a common refrain that comes up, and it goes something like this. Man, what you're saying really resonates with me. Man, that's really hard. I really care for these kids. But I could never do foster care. I could never do it. My heart is just too big. It would be too hard for me. I couldn't see kids go back to their parents. I just would want to love them. I want to keep them all. I could never do it. And really what they're saying in some form or another is, I cannot love foster kids because I will suffer. That's really what they're saying when they say that. I just couldn't do it. God bless you for doing that. I couldn't do it, right? I don't have the heart for it. The fear of suffering is not an excuse not to love. Let me say that again. The fear of suffering is not an excuse not to love. To be a Christian is to suffer. Now, that's not on your TV program at night when you're watching the televangelists. Because their Bible, their New Testament doesn't talk about suffering. They talk about blessings a whole lot and being super happy and getting lots of nice things from God. But they don't talk about suffering. You cannot read Jesus, you cannot read the New Testament without the constant refrain that to be a Christian means to suffer. Paul goes as far as to say, anybody who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will suffer. What's the antithesis of that? If you're not suffering, you're not living a godly life, is what Paul says. What does Jesus say? Anybody who wants to be my disciple must pick up his cross every day and follow me. He must deny himself and he must follow me. Jesus Christ suffered, and he calls us to suffer as well. Fear of suffering is not an excuse not to love. It's a reason to love. Suffering is a reason to love. And this is where Christianity gets wacky, right? This is why, if you're not a Christian here in this room, you're looking at me, you're like, that's messed up, dude. It is messed up. Who wants to live a life of suffering? Jesus suffered for us, and we suffer for others. That's the beauty of the Christian community, right? That's the beauty, is I carry your sufferings and you carry mine. And so when you have that little foster baby who's 1 month old, and he's up at night and he's screaming and crying because his mom wanted to use drugs while she was pregnant for 9 months, and that little baby is withdrawing from those drugs, and he's crying and he's screaming, we scream with that child, and we suffer with that child. When that little 4-year-old girl comes to you and she's in your home and she's struggling in daycare and she's biting kids and she's punching kids because her dad punched her mom and her dad stabbed her mom and her dad left her with all kinds of babysitters and she's struggling, we suffer with her. We can take on that suffering for that child. As Christians, that is our call. When that 13-year-old girl is struggling in school because she never learned how to read, she was too busy taking care of her 5-year-old and her 3-year-old and 2-year-old brother while mom and dad were out partying. She never was good in school, and so she's acting out in school now. We carry that suffering with her. We bear that with her because that's what it means to be a Christian, is to suffer with those who are suffering. And in that suffering for those kids, we find life. and we find the gospel, and we get to live out what we were created for, what Jesus died for us. We get to be a part of that process for them. And it is not pleasant, and it is not easy. And I know for sure, because I know a lot of people in this room, and a lot of people are foster parents, a lot of people have adopted in this room, and they're saying, man, it ain't as easy as he's saying. He doesn't know what it was like for me. If you want to be a foster parent, you will suffer. I will guarantee it. I will guarantee it. You will deal with trauma. You will deal with things you never wanted to deal with. But our call as Christians is to love those who cannot care for themselves and to suffer with them. As I get ready to close, I want to just share one final story. There's a sociologist named Rodney Stark. I think he's at Baylor University, and he wrote a wonderful book many years ago called The Rise of Christianity. The premise of his book was trying to explore why is it and how is it that Christianity rose to become the most popular religion of all time in a short span of 200 to 300 years, right? Because Jesus came and died, and within 300 years, the entire Roman Empire was Christian, or at least that was the national religion. And so he's doing research. How did this happen? And he cited a number of factors about how that happened. But he said one of the most prominent things about why all these people became Christians was because the Christians loved people when nobody else would. When there was plagues, literally the town would flee, right? If there was an infectious plague that was spreading, the town would leave. And history shows us that the Christians stayed and they took care of those people at risk of their own life. And those people said, why would you do this for me? Why would you risk your life for me? Because Jesus did it for me, I do it for you. My hope and my dream, honestly, for the city of Spokane right now today, we are in a crisis. We are in a crisis in our community. My hope would be that the Christians would rise up and that we would be the answer to this problem, and that the world would look at us and say, why are you doing that? Because Jesus suffered for us, we suffer with others. Jesus loved us, so we love others. I would love for the people at my office, for the people that I work with, to say, what's going on, man? We just got 40 new applicants from Summit. They'll hate me. Their job will get so hard and they'll be so stressed if we did that. If one family rose up from every church in Spokane today and became a foster family, the crisis would be solved. Done. If one family from every church in Spokane took on that call, it would create an incredible ripple. And I just want to tell you that you're in a community here at Summit where I really feel, I know I've kind of yelled at you, but our community here, one of the reasons why I'm here is because we've really taken up this cause. And even in this room right now, I saw my friend Teresa Forche, who's a foster parent and who does all of the forensic medical exams here in our Spokane for kids who are being abused, right? She's here in our church. We've probably got 15, 20, 25 foster families here. We've got 6 or 7 social workers from my office that go to church at Summit here. You're not alone. If you rise up and say, yeah, I want to do this, I'll be that family, we'll be that family, you won't do it alone. We will be here to support you. We don't just need foster parents to take kids short-term, long-term. We need people who want to just take kids on the weekends and give other foster parents a break. So you may not be in a position to do, the big thing, but you might be in a position to help out another family. This is the cause of Christ. This is what he's put us here to do. And this is what I would love to see the city of Spokane do. Let's worship, and then I'll come back out and close this out.